Awesome. Delighted to moderate the panel today. Good to have participation from the established startup, 40 people operating. So not very little fundraising, external fundraising done, I believe. So don't see this that much these days. We got a representative from the big corporate, Scania. You know a lot about this guy already. And we got Marek here, which will wear the hat of sort of city, the agency on the panel today. So before jumping into the questions and the discussion, from my side, I'll offer, I think, venture capital sort of perspective. I'm a partner at the Contrarian Ventures. We invest in early stage energy tech and e-mobility startups across Europe and Israel. We are based in Vilnius, Lithuania, just across there. Been very active for 2 years, have 14 portfolio companies in our collection, and we're very excited about the mobility, very excited about energy technology, about the convergence with the mobility space. So very glad to be here at this panel. We think the mobility, transport, logistics sectors are one of the most dynamic ones these days, and it's very exciting to see the changes in it. It's very dynamic. There's new business models, there's abundance of VC money, there's rapid tech improvements, and just very phenomenal consumer participation and the pickup, which is really alters the consumer behavior, which is very, very hard to do. Like the Facebook, the Airbnb, the Skyscanner managed to do it. Micromobility, the scooters managed to do it in record time. So very interesting fact for me, I think a lot of you guys already seen it in a bunch of presentations and the conferences, is that micromobility, the penetration of 100 million rides, for example, achieved by Lime, the key US player, has been achieved in 2 years, while Uber has been achieved in 4 years. So it just shows the tremendous potential in that. But micromobility, which we have Kristen for, that will be sort of representing it, is just a small part of it. There's trucks, there's buses, there's electric cars, there's autonomous vehicles, there's hyperloops, public transport, trains, and so on. So again, sort of putting all of this stuff together is really, really important. I think while Jonas has sort of given big introduction about him and his company, maybe you can give sort of 1 minute brief on what's your role at Scania in the day-to-day, what do you care about, what do you do, and then we'll do sort of the full round.
Sure, very shortly. No, basically my job is to support and train our different business units globally. We are present on over 100 markets around the world. And we are going from actually selling diesel vehicles to selling solutions, including not only the clean vehicles, but also the energy coming with it, and also clever fleet management solutions in connection to that. So that is a very different sales job, if you like it, from just being the traditional car salesman. So we are spending a lot of time training our local Scania offices in working with this. That takes most of my time, and then of course I work a lot with setting up partnerships with different energy companies around the world.
Okay. And Kristen, the CEO of CoModule, I think everyone knows you here.
No, I don't think so. Happy to be here. I'm Christian, one of the founders and manager of CoModule. We're actually 57 people now. Mm-hmm. What we do is we connect bicycles and scooters with the internet. We've been doing that for the last 5 years. In the first 4 years of our existence, everybody asked, are we stupid and why do we do that, and why bicycles need to be connected to the internet. Today we have connected more than 150,000 vehicles in more than 60 different cities around the world. And the easiest example why do you need it are these small kick scooters that are also in the streets of Tallinn. So if you press a button on your mobile app so that the scooter would start, then you actually need this scooter to be connected to the internet. And this is the core technology that we do. And what is my job? Today it was to build our own small factory in Tallinn. And the next thing is we're actually going to build our own kick scooters in Estonia as well. So we try to beat the Chinese in this business. Yeah. that
Awesome.
shortly.
Cool. And the last guest, Marek Strandberg, who's the expert and consultant on energy and climate at Energy Agency of City of Tallinn.
Yeah. Tallinn has agreed that in 2030, 40% of carbon dioxide or greenhouse gases emissions will be reduced. It's really a huge task, keeping in mind what is nowadays current energy profile in Estonia, mostly based on the fossil fuels, even in the cities. And therefore, huge work has to be done, and mostly it's related to the transportation, not even so much to households, but mostly to transportation. And of course, we can have, let's say, that kind of bright future, using a lot of electric vehicles, but on the other hand, if there is, let's say, the possibility to ask people more drive in the roads, in bicycles, in electric bicycles, in kick scooters, that's the way. And we imagine that for 2030, if all those, let's say, the concepts will work in Tallinn, roughly 60 to 100,000 trips per day can be made by lightweight vehicles, which is the most remarkable potential to reduce the greenhouse gases emission in Tallinn.
Cool. Awesome. So we'll get back to the light vehicles in a moment. I wanted to start with Jonas and Scania and the big vehicles. So when scrolling through Scania's website, I noticed a sort of big goal from the sustainability perspective to achieve a fossil-free heavy industry by 2050. And you got this big white paper and sort of 4 key buckets. I think your thesis or sort of how you're going to do it, or what are the most important things. So maybe to just run the audience through very quickly, you say that electrification is the most efficient, the quickest and the cost effective. The biofuels is sort of the best near-term choice that could be leveraged right now. And here, as you said in your presentation, sort of fuel cell will be the late start for EVs. And the last one is sort of, hey, you got multiple tech combined for this carbon-free future. You mentioned a lot of things in your presentation. I think you guys do a lot, and you had a very short amount of time, but sort of if you could maybe summarize the vision of how you see Scania achieving this goal by 2050, sort of, do biofuels now, you're going to go to electricity in 5 years, and then the hydrogen in 10 years, because what I was actually quite surprised that Scania sells very, very few full electric buses and trucks these days, because you see Chinese cities sort of being 100% electric, driven by electric buses and so on. So if you could sort of elaborate on this journey, that'd be very interesting.
Yes, it starts, of course, with what I talked about, that there will be no one solution because there's so many different transport missions. Inner city bus operation, waste collector, as compared to a big mining vehicle or a long haulage vehicle going through Europe, very different transport missions. So we will, for decades to come, need different technologies to be able to run this in a low carbon way. So that is why we come back to our modular platform. We try to make sure that our traditional combustion engine can operate on all the available biofuels, and we will make that possible also for the future. And our electric driveline, we make it open, also modular, so it can take energy from, be it a battery, be it a fuel cell, be it an electrified highway, or even inductive. That is really important for us. We see the biofuels and the electrification as the most cost-efficient ways. It's actually where you get the most emission cuts for your money spent. That is the philosophy that we use. We really would like to think also that our decision makers would love to look at the well-to-wheel perspective, because what the planet cares about is not technology, it's the amount of fossil carbon that we reduce. So I think that so our philosophy will always be to look at sort of CO2 efficiency per money spent, and to keep this openness in the platform so we can take fuels and electricity from all types of sources. That is basically our philosophy, I would say.
So you mentioned something quite interesting when we spoke yesterday on the phone about a lot of Chinese sort of buses and the cities subsidizing a lot of those buses will be still, and you sort of Scania obviously as a corporate having private shareholders rather than governments, sort of really always looks at the commercial potential and commercial possibility to install those buses. Sort of, does it make sense commercially today? How do you guys think about Chinese electric buses penetration and also about maybe the subsidy side of should Europe do more to bring those electric buses, trucks to the streets?
I think it is a core principle at Scania that when we design a vehicle, it has to stand on its own merits. It needs to be profitable in its own merits. I mean, that's the only way we can operate and put the vehicle out. We cannot leave the customer with something that can suddenly cost him a lot of money per kilometer in the end. So that is why we have chosen maybe a different technical solutions than if you compare to some of the Chinese colleagues.
Yeah.
They have a different technology. They particularly look at full battery vehicles with a lot of battery in the side of them. We try to keep the battery to a minimum and instead do the type of opportunity charging, as we say, at the end of the line, which opens up for using less battery, but also gives you more passenger capacity or load capacity if it is a freight vehicle. For us, this is by far the most commercial option, and it is also the best for the customer in our view. And of course, it's tough to compete also with the subsidized business, but we cannot sort of deviate from this principle. Of course, it would be good if we had support also from Europe in this way, but our philosophy will still be that we design for something that do not need subsidies.
Got it. Okay. Going to sort of more of the micromobility side from Christian's perspective. So, Co-Module's been sort of at the forefront of this micromobility movement. 150K vehicles already served with the Co-Module technology. So even you guys don't really run the platforms yourselves, you sort of really know what's happening on many streets, given you have sort of, well, at least you provide the ability to get that data. Can you talk a little bit about how do you think about micromobility as sort of enabling tool to reduce congestion, traffic, and really make the transition to more sustainable transport, at the same time not cluttering the cities, not cluttering the curbs, making sure it's safe, and making sure that municipalities and cities are really happy in implementing that structured micromobility policy around it?
Yeah, so maybe I'll put my ideas for the Scania answers as well. I think one of the things that's underestimated is also air pollution in the city. So we very often talk about CO2 reduction, which has a clear indication or goal for the global warming aspect, but there has also very serious health hazards when you live inside a city and you breathe in what comes out from the diesel vehicles. It's been very clearly shown in the world thanks to the Volkswagen Dieselgate as well. We've been pushing these Euro standards, and on paper we believe they're really good, but in reality, even the new cars were actually not good, not to talk about when they're already a little bit older. So I think the main mission of Co-Module as such is not really only to look at the general CO2 emissions, but for us it's more about to save lives inside the cities, because I also have a 2.5-year-old son. He's about that height. So when he's walking on the street and the diesel truck accelerates in front of him and this black cloud comes out, I actually always pick him up because I don't want him to breathe it in. And in Europe, and especially in Tallinn, we're in a good position because, we are, the internal pollution levels are relatively low and there's a lot of wind and etc. But for example, Google had to change their air pollution chart this year because in India for 3 months it was 999. So today air pollution kills more people in the aspect of years than wars or drugs or some of the diseases combined. So that's also one aspect we shouldn't overlook. And in that sense, I also think that, for example, these gas vehicles are extremely good alternative when you look at the buses, because what comes out of that vehicle is completely different chemical composition of what comes from a traditional diesel vehicle. And also maybe the question about subsidies. What I think world has to understand is that we have to change our taxation system. I think it's stupid to pay money to somebody to buy an electric vehicle. because it's a loss for the government. So what Estonia tries to do also now, it's again to give small kind of incentives to buy electric vehicles. I think it's wrong. It should be the other way around. You tax people who don't buy low-emission vehicles. And you see how well this works in Norway, where you basically have a car tax, and buying a car that has a high emission has a significantly bigger effect than buying a low-emission vehicle. And that's why everybody owns a Tesla or an electric car, because they're cheapest. That's what you can create, and I think all of the world has to look in that sense. We are taxing you if you use a road. That's a tax for the gasoline and etc. But we have to start understanding that the very big problem is pollution, and therefore we have to tax pollution. The same way we also tax hazardous chemicals or hazardous waste. There's a clear payment or tax for that for the industry. We should tax pollution for everybody. And I think micromobility plays both of these games or both of these roles. And the real value of micromobility is that you don't really even have to do technological innovation anymore. And I think that's why the boom of kick scooters has been also so big, is the technology for electric bicycles or the technology for electric scooters is there already at least for 5 years, maybe even for 10 years. So it's already old technology, and it's working, and it's cheap, and it's in mass production. So there's no technological barriers, and this is what has made it so accessible to everybody. And when we talk about small vehicles in the city and that they clutter the streets and they're dangerous, then this, I believe, is 100% just human psychology and what we are used to and what we're not used to. So if people say that kick scooters are very dangerous, if you compare how many people have died on a bicycle or a kick scooter versus how many people die in cars, it's uncomparable. If you say that kick scooters or bicycles are cluttering the streets, if you compare it to the amount of cars parking in parking lots and the amount of space that they acquire, it's uncomparable. If you put 20 or 50 kick scooters, you would need three car spaces for that. So it's not even 10x, it's maybe even 20x difference. So it's just really in our minds. And I think governments or cities, local governments could do very simple things very quickly. Instead of making big projects and big plans what to do in the future, just take some paint and then paint 3 car parking spots green and put a bicycle sign on it, and you're already solving the clutter because people have a space where to park and they don't leave them on the pedestrian roads. So I think this concept of, hey, I don't want bikes or scooters in my city because there's too many of them and they're ugly, that's really in our minds. Just think about how many ugly cars we have. The thing is just that these car companies, the car companies make too many beautiful car commercials. So in our minds, we actually think that cars are beautiful, but they're not really.
Yeah. Maybe the next co-module electric scooter will be as handsome as Tesla these days.
It is very beautiful.
Okay. Agree with all of that as a micromobility fan, so good to hear it. And maybe moving to Marek, I think probably got a lot of things maybe to say or comment, the taxation on the electric vehicles, encouraging people to adopt it. But maybe a more specific question would be, as a sort of the city representative, do you think, what can city do to help adopt the micromobility and sort of enable it in a good way?
Yeah, the taxation issue is very good because everybody wants to tax our people like the Norwegians do, but we can't. Because the car tax in Estonia has very bad impact to the rural areas, and it is quite obvious. Therefore, we do have certain type of concept about the allowing for local municipalities to tax the internal combustion engine cars to drive and be and park and whatever inside of the cities. And that's the, let's say, the now observation of us, the idea, because you need certain type of state law to allow for local municipalities to tax the internal combustion cars. And that's maybe the easiest way how to, let's say, to move away from the cities, keeping in mind the need for the cleaner air and etc. The diesel car and gasoline car and whatever type of things. But of course, that's I am not the policymaker. I am just, let's say, the technology and climate expert. But for the city government, it's the necessary issue to start to negotiate with the government, the state government, about that kind of taxation. Because outside of the big cities, there is no possibility to live without a car, and the car has to be cheap today in Estonia, and unfortunately, that's the gasoline or diesel car. But not in the cities. Cities are mostly rich people, and you can avoid having the roads allowing over the year in every season to drive with a bicycle or kick scooter, but there is not yet such roads, so that the taxing in the cities of gasoline cars will be the way how to collect the money to build up very fast way, roughly 300 kilometers of roads for bicycles and kick scooters in Tallinn. And that's quite realistic because it can be done in a few years. And if you have, let's say, the maintained roads in winter, in spring, in autumn, in summer, and for the maintenance, you can use the same type of robots you saw there in downstairs, the cleaning from the leaves, ice, snow, dirt, whatever. Those roads, so that's the main, let's say, the driving force to put the people or ask the people to drive in the city for the healthiest conditions for everybody, the lightweight vehicles. And really, such kind of, let's say, the kick scooters, electric scooters, that's really phenomenon because it was so fast how they started to use it. I myself, I drove 1,600 kilometers by a kick scooter in this year.
I guess that's a record of Estonia.
No.
I can check data.
Yeah, I don't think so, because it's so easy. It's so, and combine it with public transportation, it's a good way. In other hand, you see that that's kind of what is happening today. It's like the beginning of new industrial revolution, quite obviously. I think so. You have seen it already. And therefore, what kind of future we have, I even don't know, because I think so that, for example, the new type of hybrid vehicles most probably combine two things, the batteries as well as the fuel cells. And those are existing today, so that for the longer distances, you can fuel your car with a hydrogen. For the short distances, just use the battery. And in 10 years, most probably, we will see the diversity of different new type of vehicles. They are already somewhere in your drawing table, or computer, sorry, not the drawing table anymore. and that's the way how, let's say, the every city, because the Tallinn has signed that kind of agreement with all together, as I know, 9,000 other cities in the world to reduce those carbon dioxide emissions for 2050 to zero. So that that's the picture here, and I'm pretty sure that if the roads are maintained, well made, interconnected with bus stops and public transportation lines, so that all the things starts to train people also to behave differently, not to buy so much even electric cars, because for the keeping in mind the issue of the public space, electric car is the same size as internal combustion engine cars. So that we need to create some changes in this pattern to allow and ask people more use some lightweight vehicles or just walk.
Yeah. So I want to sort of stop here a little bit on the training the people side, sort of making sure they change their behavior in a good way for the city and for the environment and so on. So I think very big part of it is data. sort of, I think Este Energia calls it the new big oil, is data these days. Totally agree. So maybe Christian, you could start. Obviously, you're the data guy of the co-module, providing the possibility for these scooters to really look at the environment and report it back to the platforms. How can you use how can you enable the data to enable the more friendly adoption of micromobility in the city? Sort of, what do you give to the municipalities, to the governments, so they could actually enforce a better, more friendly usage of these micromobility tools? I don't want to see only scooters, because I know you guys do electric bikes, and maybe
Yes.
scooters is just a phase.
Yes, I have to disappoint you here. I don't believe data is that important, because it can also, we see from our customers, the operators, I think for the first year, nobody had time to look at data. Everybody was just putting them on the street and making sure that they actually work. So for this whole growth, there was no data. Of course, we can now use it to build, to make the next level better. But I think one thing I wanted to add for the cities, and it's also connected with data and how people move, is we should make cities difficult for cars. I live in this Kalamaja district, which is just here, and historically, it's an old district with wooden houses. So you have basically no car parking, only on the streets. So for me, it's like extremely difficult to park. I wouldn't know every night whether I can park or not. But when you build a new house in the city, you have a requirement that you have to create X parking spots. So what happens is usually when apartment buildings are built, they build underground car parks. So if you would just, for example, avoid this rule, and you would say that no, you don't have to build car parking spots when you build an apartment building, then everybody who will go to live this apartment building, it will be very difficult to own a car. It will be much easier to own a bicycle and drive with that. And the same, actually, I think Tallinn has done very well in my area, in Kalamaja area, is that they have actually narrowed many streets, like the Soo Street and some others. They have made very wide pedestrian streets. They have brought down the speeds of the cars. So again, I think you don't have to create very deep studies, where people move, what is the data. You don't have to invest into making something too much better. Maybe you just make something worse. Because if you put less car roads, you actually have a little bit less maintenance as well. So maybe in the end, it's even cheaper for the city. So I think, this kind of, I think it's, what's the English word, these common use areas, where you have the cars, pedestrians, bikes are all roughly at the same speed, which is normally what, old towns have. If you create more of these spaces, then it just naturally happens. Because people are smart. If it's cheaper and faster, they will take a bike.
I think so that part of that is happening already. So
Absolutely,
that
yes.
the next step of city planning includes all those things what you're talking here. So that the new areas most probably don't have any more the necessity to have, let's say, the two parking places for each flat or something like that, which makes no sense.
Absolutely. And we already see that cities are changing that direction. So I think all in all, we're in good waters. Things are getting better day by day. But it's always this egg and chicken, like, do I really, but that's a very clear data example we had from San Francisco, actually. So who has been in San Francisco, you have all of these very wide one-way streets and quite small pedestrian streets. And what San Francisco did was that they started deleting car lanes and made the whole car lane as a one-way bicycle road. And they said that the biggest problem they had initially was every time they did it, they had to collect data locally to show how many bikes go by every day, just to prove it to people. Because all people who were driving cars got very mad if one line or lane was taken off. So they had to show to people that if, 5,000 cars go by in a day, then when we deleted this lane, then in 2 months, there was 10,000 bicycles going by. So this is what data helps to do. It actually helps you to show what to do, but it also helps you to prove afterwards whether it was the right thing to do or the worst thing to do. And often experts actually don't need it, but it's more needed for the public to show that actually it was a good thing to do.
Okay, maybe let's shift the gears to Jonas, and can you talk about on what things you spend at Scania, and what things you spend most of your research and development money these days? When you talk in the strategy session, is it, hey, hydrogen, we gotta allocate a budget of 40%, electric vehicle, is that autonomous, any sort of autonomous solutions is extremely important, will be in 10 years, sort of, if you could elaborate on that stuff.
Of course, it's hard to say. I would say that more than half of the money we turn over is actually going into R&D in some form. And a lot of that is, of course, connected to meeting legislation and existing upcoming legislations, not only for emissions, but all these other things with safety and security and so. But we have a very clearly dedicated goal that we should try to put out by 2040, if we can, totally fossil-free solutions. So this is the overall target, really. So a lot of money goes into this, I would say. And then we need to spend a lot of money because we still, as I said, we do not see one silver bullet solutions because there is no silver bullet solution.
Okay.
So we spend, I would say, an equal amount on both the electrification side, the alternative fuel side, but also on the data and the autonomy side, because I think we are only scratching the surface. We have a vast amount of data. We really don't know what to do with all of it. I mentioned a few things that we were doing on the way, but I think we can still do so many more things with this. So we could maybe even actually connect the vehicles to the policy system, which so I agree completely that we need functional taxation for different types of emissions. Yeah, it's the only way to go there. I mean, we are totally for a CO2 tax globally. It's worked really well in the Scandinavian countries where we actually divided the tax of energy and CO2 into two, and we have two separate tax systems for that. That has really been driving the defossilization of the whole society. And this could actually be used if you connect it to the vehicles as well. You can see how much you run and if you run with a fossil vehicle or not.
So we'll get back to the autonomous vehicle side in a moment. Before we diverge, can you talk about e-highways and using the pantograph a bit more? I'm very excited about this. It seems like a perfect intermediary solution. How big is it for Scania? I know you mentioned yesterday you got, I think, maybe 15 roads in Germany or something like that opened up already?
The first project, it's not an intermediate solution. I do believe that this can be a really long-term solution. Again, coming back to, we had a lot of battery worries initially, and we share a little bit of this. Sustainability of battery is not in place at the moment. We are investing in European production or Swedish production in batteries to make sure that we can follow the sustainability of the batteries. When you do the e-highway, basically you put the pantograph on the existing hybrid driveline. That means that for 95% of the load, you can actually run full electric. And by electrifying only around 15% of the grid, of the road grid, we can reach 90% of the heavy-duty transport. And we can do it with a minimum size battery. So this, by far, we think is a superior sustainable solution if you want to electrify. Right. So we see that this could be a big project. So we had the one highway part in northern Sweden where we've been operating this now for 2 years. It's been really functioning well, and there will be now 3 or possibly 4 parts of the Autobahn where we will do it in Germany now. So that's the next step.
If you take all German roads and you take 15%, will it be more than our electrified railroads in Germany today, or it will be less?
Super good question. Maybe we can use some big data for that.
So just to get the scale of how much...
If you look at the load that's being transported on the road and compare it to the load transported on rail, probably we would have more electrified. Yes, I would actually look
But
at
I mean, kilometer-wise on the roads, like, in the sense just to understand how much it costs, because in Germany all railroads are electric anyway, so we have kind of done it before.
Yes.
So, yeah.
No, I think if you electrify like 20% of the grid, it would be a lot more cargo, because the truck side carry much more cargo today than the railroad does.
So going to Christian, I assume you're not thinking of installing a pantograph on your scooters anytime soon to charge them. But how do you think about them? Because a lot of people say e-scooters will stay here. A lot of people say it will just sort of fad for 3 years or 5 years. How do you think about scooters versus e-bikes versus e-mopeds, or even new forms of transport that maybe co-module will be fueling, such as, I don't know, quadricycles or whatever? How do you guys internally think about the cities in like 10 years? What's the most efficient solution, I think?
That's also a good question. So how this kick scooter thing happened in the world? There was one guy called Travis van der Zanden. This guy had first worked for Uber, and then he worked for Lyft, which is competition of Bolt. And then he created his own company and told to the investors that, I know all the problems that Uber has, I know all the problems that Lyft has, and this problem is called the driver. So I will create a new solution where there is no driver. So I basically have an autonomous mobility service where I put them on the streets, people ride themselves, but I can ask them almost the same money that I can ask when you're riding an Uber. What he did, he bought some of these scooters from China and put them on the streets in Santa Monica, California. I heard about it last year summer, and when I heard that something big is going on and one company's valuation has gone from 0 to 1 billion in 4 months, then I just booked tickets and I flew to California. And I remember the first time when I came out from the taxi, or probably it was Uber, I came out at the beach, and in the first 2 minutes I saw, I think, like a 9-year-old Asian girl, and then like a 75-year-old big black mama, and everything in between. So all kinds of people, boys, girls, older people, younger people, everybody, fat and skinny. And then I understood that this is really a phenomenal type of vehicle. Because the problem with a bicycle is that some people feel insecure riding a bicycle. Not in Estonia, but in many other places of the world. Women with skirts are not very comfortable riding a bicycle, and etc., etc. But this vehicle really kind of was a fundamental difference, because everybody felt very secure. You stand still like you're walking, you are a little bit higher, so you see further, you can step down, you can step, so it feels genuinely safe as well. So I actually think that this type of vehicle will go on for a very long time.
Surprisingly, actually, the first pictures of that kind of electric scooter are since beginning of the last century.
Yes, 100 years old. Almost.
Yeah, 100 years old, with a old-fashioned lead battery and large electric
Correct.
motor.
And there's a lady on it.
And lady on it.
Correct.
With a
And this lady was actually a revolutionary, so she was politically very active as well. So, that's the saying that everything old is reinvented new. So I think that vehicle type will remain, but mainly because it's small, it's cheap, and it's efficient. And as I said before, I think the main value of micromobility today is that it's technology that's already been here for 10 years. So our technology, so the connectivity, actually just enables the new business model. It doesn't enable this type of vehicle. And I think, as a colleague here says, they're investing in all kinds of technologies. They don't know what wins. But in micromobility, there will be no hydrogen and there will be no gas. I mean, it will only be fully electric, and that's clear.
There's one point more, so that we are thinking about the possibility to put different type of sensors. They became so cheap, so effective on different type of vehicles, just to monitor, including the pollution and whatever. And in that point, that kind of circulating kick scooters, a good platform.
Absolutely, yeah.
For that to understand what is happening in the city, because if you have that kind of, let's say, the large air pollution analyzing stations, heavy, slow, but if you have that kind of field of sensors,
Yes.
you will have, let's say, very fast response about what happens in the city, and you can provide for the people fast alert about the bad air conditions or whatever.
Yes, we've actually done some study, but we found out that the sensors at that moment were a little bit too expensive for us just to put them, on the scooters for the good of it. But we could discuss it a little bit later. It's definitely a big potential.
Good.
So talking about sensors and other slightly more expensive things like radars and LiDARs and autonomous vehicles, we'd love to get all of your sort of thoughts on the future of autonomous vehicles, including some AVs in the streets of Tallinn sometime soon. And I know Scania is, as you mentioned, doing some autonomous stuff already in the very confined areas, and there are already commercial use cases. Estonia actually has one of the startups, very successful startup called Starship, that does last mile deliveries at sort of 4 miles an hour in small white robots, very successful in the United States as well. And in the scooter space, as Contrarian Ventures, we looked at one US startup called Tortoise, who does autonomous rebalancing of scooters in the city. So sort of gives you the data of where the certain scooters should be based on the peak demand, and it autonomously reallocates it to that corner of the street. And if there's a very complicated, let's say, traffic situation or a roundabout, the teleops person would switch on the camera and would sort of relocate that scooter for the last 10 meters himself. So there's solutions even in the micromobility sector. Maybe we'll start with, we got very little time, we'll start with maybe Marek. What's your vision of when do you see AVs being prominent, maybe in Estonia?
As colleague said, there is no one solution. You have to be all the time very having good attention regarding the new technologies appearing, and it's like the early stage of universe before of Big Bang. Something happened all the time, and finally we got the universe we have. And similarly, there are so many of technologies. No one knows actually how much autonomous vehicles can be used in the future. But obviously, it's necessary to assist drivers. And that's very important to increase the security, to increase or reduce the accidents numbers in the city. So that we don't know exactly, but we have to pay continuous attention regarding the new technologies and be kind of productive according to that.
Jonas, if you've got, I know we're running out of time, but you've got 30 seconds.
So again, I mean, as I said, for some decade to come, I think for heavy duty, it will still be in confined areas. It is still not safe to have it out in the city. We could see, I mean, at those high speeds and with these heavy type of vehicles in all kinds of weather. I mean, it will be easier in some places, of course. One of the first big applications, typically one of the BRT systems you saw with dedicated lanes, where there it can actually be used in an efficient way, maybe within 10 years or so.
Okay.
I think that driving a truck is probably one of the least interesting jobs in the world. So I would say that autonomous vehicles have to push for trucks, and that where it really makes sense, because then we can get people as truck drivers and put them to work, with their minds and brains and creativeness. So I think that would be a massive thing first. I think passenger cars autonomous is a very bad thing for the cities. There's one thing that is very rarely thought about is that yes, Uber and Lyft and Bolt would love autonomous cars because they would get, again, drivers away. And it's good because then these drivers can, do other things and make the world a better place. But if parking in Tallinn already costs, I think, like €4 per hour or something in the central. So if I go to the cinema, it's cheaper for me to let my car rotate around the cinema for 2 hours than to park the car. So if we have actually fully autonomous cars, passenger-owned cars in the cities, it will make our traffic significantly worse. I would drive to my work and then I would let my car to go home.
No, it's like the bloodstream, always
yes, constantly
moving.
So you would probably have double the amount of trips, or maybe even triple if cars just rotate around the cinema and you have 500 people in the cinema. So I think this is something that is really overseen. I think it will just not work. It will just be broken. So as well as if only taxis are autonomous, but if there's no driver, it will cost probably 3 times less than today. So everybody will drive a taxi because it will be cheaper than public transport. If everybody drives a taxi, then the cars will not fit in the streets. So this is something nobody really thinks about. So I think everybody's pushing it, but in the end, it will only be useful for just I'm driving from one city to another, and then I switch to autonomous because it's convenient and safe. But yeah, in the cities, poof, it will be very difficult.
Okay.
But
Awesome.
please help truck drivers.
Agreed. Yeah.
Thanks, guys. I appreciate it. I think
Thank
we're
you.
out of time.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. Thank you to Jonas. Thank you to Christian. Thank you to Marek. And thank you to Thomas.